Hello again, everyone. I'm back to tell you another story. Today we're going to try the story of Briar Rose, and you're going to think you recognize it because of Cinderella, or maybe Sleeping Beauty. But you'll be both right and wrong. Now, once upon a time, there was a king and a queen who said each day, if only we had a child. But they never got one. Well, celibacy. Once in a while, the queen was bathing, and a frog would crawl out of the water to the shore and say to her, "Before a year is up, you will give birth to a daughter." Don't know why one of my cousins was there, but they meddled. It happened, as the frog said. The queen had a daughter who was so beautiful that the king was overjoyed and ordered a great feast. He invited not only his kinfolk, his friends, and his acquaintances, but also the wise women, so they would be gracious and kind to the child. Does that sound familiar yet? There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but because he only had 12 golden plates for them to eat off of, one of them had to stay home. Yeah, because everybody gotta have a golden plate. The feast was celebrated with all magnificence, and when it was over, the wise women presented the child with their magic gifts. One with virtue, the second with beauty, the third with riches, and so on, with everything in the world one could wish for. After 11 of them had pronounced their blessings, the 13th suddenly entered. She wanted to avenge herself for not having been invited. Such maleficence. And without greeting or so much as looking at anyone, she cried out in a loud voice, "In her 15th year, the king's daughter shall prick herself with a spindle and fall down dead." Well, Disney, could you pick one story to steal from? Without another word, she turned her back and left the hall. Everybody was horrified, but the 12th, who still had her wish, came forward. Since she could not revoke the curse, but mitigate it, she said, "The king's daughter shall not die, but she will fall into a deep sleep that shall last for 100 years. Wow, it's like we're cribbing notes from each other. The king, who wished to guard his beloved child against all this misfortune, had orders given that all the spindles in the entire kingdom were to be burned, because we don't want pets anymore. Well, yeah, and curses. She was so beautiful. Well, skipped a line. All the gifts of the wise women were fulfilled upon the girl. There we go. She was so beautiful, virtuous, kind, and intelligent, she won the hearts of all who looked upon her, except for someone who was still angry about dinner. It happened that on her 15th birthday, the king and the queen were away, because that's safe. And the girl stayed behind all alone in the castle. She went about wherever she pleased, looking at all the rooms and chambers, and came at last to an old tower. She climbed the narrow spiral staircase and arrived at a little door. A rusty key sat in the lock. When she turned it, because WD-40 was in her pocket, the door sprang open. And there in a little room sat a little old woman with a spindle, busily spinning flax. "Well, how do you do, Granny?" said the king's daughter. "And what are you doing?" "I'm spinning," said the old woman, nodding her head. "Why is that thing that bobs up and down so merrily upon your spindle?" The king's daughter. She took the spindle because she wanted to spin too. But hardly had she touched the thing when the magic spell was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger. Upon that very moment she felt the prick, and she fell down into a bed which was standing there and lay in a deep, deep sleep. Because, premeditation. And the sleep spread throughout the castle, because curses. And the king and queen, who had just come home, entered the hall and fell into a deep sleep right there on the floor with the entire court, still with all their luggage and packs and bags and everything, without even going to the bathroom or anything. The horses went to sleep at the stable, and the dogs in the courtyard, and the pigeons on the roof, and the flies on the walls, the spiders in the roast. Even the roast stopped sizzling, and the cook, who was about to pull the scullery boy's hair for some stupid mistake because abuse, let him go and slept. The wind dropped, and not a leaf stirred on the trees outside the castle. And then, because we didn't read the fine print on the curse, a briar hedge began to grow around the castle. And it got bigger each year, until at last it surrounded the entire castle completely and covered it so nothing of the castle could be seen anymore, not even the flag on the roof. But a legend swept through the land about a beautiful sleeping princess and a sudden lack of government. And they called her Briar Rose, for that is what they called the king's daughter. So that from time to time king's sons came and tried to break through the hedge around the castle, but due to lack of landscaping it was impossible, because the briars clung tightly together, as though they had hands, and the young men got caught in them, and they could not get free again, and they perished miserably. After many long years, another king's son came into the land, and heard of an old man telling about the briar hedge, where there was supposed to be a castle, in which a wondrously beautiful king's daughter called Briar Rose had been sleeping for 100 years. And with her slept the king and the king's court. His grandfather had told him that many king's sons had already tried to penetrate the briar hedge, but they got caught in it and died a wretched death. "I am not afraid," said the young man, "and I will try to see the beautiful Briar Rose." And no matter how much good the old man tried to warn him against it, he did not listen to him. Now the 100 years was just up, and the day had come on which Briar Rose was to wake up again, because, providence and plot devices and foreshadowing. When the king's son approached the briar hedge, it had become a mass of large and beautiful flowers that separated of themselves and let him pass unharmed, and then closed behind him, like a hedge. In the courtyard he saw the horses and spotted hunting dogs lying there asleep, and on the roof the pigeons perched with their little heads nestled under their wings. And when he came into the house, the flies were asleep on the walls, and the cook in the kitchen still held out his hand to grab that boy. And the kitchen maid was sitting before the black hen that she had to pluck, and he continued on, and in the hall the entire court was lying there asleep. And above them, next to the throne, lay the king and queen. He went still further on, because this wasn't creepy as heck or anything like that. And finally he came to a tower, and he could hear the sound of his own breathing. And he opened the door to that tower and found the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping. And there she lay, so beautiful that he could not take her eyes from her. And he bent down and kissed her, because he hadn't learned about consent tea yet. And at the touch of his kiss, Briar Rose opened her eyes, awoke, and looked at him very tenderly. Together they went down, and the king and the queen and the entire court woke up and looked at each other with wide-eyed astonishment. The horses in the courtyard got up and shook themselves, the hunting dogs jumped and wagged their tails, the pigeons on the roof pulled their heads out from under their wings and looked around and flew off to the fields, and the flies began to crawl along the walls, and the fire in the kitchen blazed up and flickered and cooked the dinner, and the roast started to sizzle, and the cook slapped the boy so that he cried out, and the kitchen maid finished plucking the hen, and taxes were reinstated, and general services started once more all over the land. And then the wedding of the king's son and Briar Rose was celebrated with all magnificence. And, of course, they lived together happily for the rest of their lives. And that is a story about how you can lose an entire monarchy, and everyone will tell you stories about it. The end. Have a happy holiday.